Chapter 15. You think you know everything already. Your home for as long as the mission demands is an improvised piece of cover. Perhaps an irrigation ditch that you've built up with vegetation and rocks until you're happy that you can work unseen. You move there when it's dark to avoid detection. Dawn finds you lying on your front, peering through the telescopic sights of your rifle. You trace the sun's path as it creeps up over the valley. Slowly, steadily, it becomes easier to see your target. You're there to watch, to wait. Watching comprises maybe 99% of your time. Sometimes you'll need to pull your trigger, but more often than not, you won't. Watching is a skill like any other, and so much of what you do is the result of hours of practice and study. The patient, at times painful acquisition of that skill. Drill after drill after drill. I remember the training I received back in Livingston Commando when I was just a rookie. We were taught that sniping wasn't about the excitement of a kill shot or the glamour of stalking prey. It was about precision, diligence, care. It was about carrying a little notebook, your sniper log, with you wherever you went. If you went out onto the range to practice, you'd record the wind strength, the humidity, the barometric pressure, and the air pressure in its pages. Then make a note of the adjustments you'd made to your weapon in order to account for it all and get the perfect shot. Watch, record, then the grinding experience of firing round after round after round after round until you get it. Then you carry out this procedure in all sorts of different conditions and locations. The number of variables you had to process was incredible. You had to know exactly how to breathe. If your target was further than 2 kilometers distant, you had to account for the rotation of the Earth, and every single one had to be understood and accounted for. It is only then, after the slow, repetitive process of training, that sniping starts to become instinctive. You begin making your own calculations subconsciously. You find yourself just thinking, right, we're 500 meters away. These are the conditions. That means 4 clicks to the right, 2 clicks up. It's not an appetite for blood that makes a good sniper. It's an appetite for knowledge. You focus on a bazaar on the outer perimeter of a village. It should be bustling with traders, mopeds, and donkeys pulling carts. But it's deathly quiet, with almost everything boarded up with corrugated iron. So you watch, you wait. You home in on the buildings in the village one by one. You draw sketches on a paper and pad, recording any intelligence you can. In the moment, your work seems futile. The obsession with details pointless. But every new piece of information helps build the pattern you need. So you watch, you wait. Who is walking in and out of where? What can you see through the windows? You log the cars coming and going. There are false starts, moments that look as if they're going to be meaningful, but end up being irrelevant. You will notice something moving on the roof of a house. Perhaps this is it. A shiver of excitement runs down your spine. Movement on the roof of Building 7, you tell your partner. So you watch, you wait, but the movement stops. At some point, you realise that nothing is going to happen. It's still only 1600 hours. That means another 17 hours in the irrigation ditch. That means a long, cold night. But your mission is not over. You cannot afford to miss a single thing. So you watch, you wait. When you're arrogant, when your mind is closed to new ideas and new concepts, when you think there's nothing left to learn, You're guaranteeing that at some point you're going to have a fucking uncomfortable collision with that wall. Because if you stop learning, you'll stop growing. And if you stop growing, you're going to end up stuck. You must be humble. There's no shame in not knowing how to do something. You should never feel embarrassed about asking questions, but you should feel humiliated if you're the sort of person who feels that they need to hide their ignorance behind a wall of bluster and lies. If you pretend you know more than you actually do, you're doing nobody a favour, least of all, yourself. It's important to understand, however, that education isn't just about degrees and certificates. It's also about what you learn from other people, what you learn from experiences. It's about cultivating a mentality that's always alert to what the world can teach you. Some people have a shit experience at school because it doesn't fit their skills. Academic learning isn't for everyone. I should know I left school without a single qualification. And some people have a shit experience at school because they're too good at it. Their life gets defined by a suffocating pressure to perform at a high level in an endless series of tests. Both types of person, for different reasons, get put off learning for the rest of their lives. But the point about education is that if you strip everything else away, it's about becoming a better version of who you are. It's not about pleasing other people or ticking boxes. Learning is something you do for yourself, not anyone else. That's the message I've tried to pass on to my kids. I don't need them to come top of the class. Education isn't a competition, but I do want them to try their hardest and to make incremental improvements, because in doing so, they're building a foundation for themselves that will serve them well later in life. You need to find a way of learning that suits you. That could be formal courses. It could be reading books. It could be YouTube videos. It could be talking to people who can help you get on. That's exactly what we did in the Marines as we learned the craft of sniping. Most of us weren't bookworms. A lot of us hadn't got on very well at school, but the pride we felt when wearing that green beret gave us a motivation to better ourselves in other ways. So we sought out those who we knew were experts at what they did and pumped them with questions about every aspect of their work. We threw ourselves into trial and error because we knew that by trying and failing until we'd figure a particular problem out, we'd learn so much more than if we just picked up a manual. In the process of gathering that knowledge, we made sure that we moulded it into something we could understand. Learning can be as much about what works in practice as what works in theory. The four corners. Formal education is great. It's really important to study hard, whether you're at primary school or university. But you should never forget that outside the four corners of the classroom are the 4 points of the world. If you can combine the four corners and the 4 points, the eyes in the sky and the boots on the ground, then I guarantee that you'll supercharge your learning. Become a watcher. I love life. I'm fascinated by it. And I know I'll never lose that fascination. There's so much to learn. I'm 41 now, and I'm so excited to find out how I'll be thinking when I'm 82. The fascination I feel is fueled by the fact that I'm a watcher. I'm curious about everything that goes on around me. It's something I've always been. But I think my time as a sniper made me more systematic about it. Even now, I learn so much from face-to-face interactions. I get a buzz from paying attention to the energy we give off and the ways in which we engage with one another. When you start watching the world closely, you begin to learn so much more. It's a really valuable lesson in the importance of getting out of your own head. You find that you can learn from your own experiences and become a whole lot better at spotting little things that you can pick up from others. Whether it's a particular skill or just a clever way of dealing with a situation. If you pay close attention to the people around you, be they family or your colleagues, you'll see very clearly what makes them tick. So you'll be better able to anticipate their emotional needs and what sorts of things they respond to. Do they react better to the carrot or the stick? Can you trust that guy in your team to get on with the job without much supervision? Or do they need to be micromanaged? What are the particular things that trigger stress in your partner? Watch, learn, repeat. Be humble. When I started working in television, I knew jack shit about the art of putting together an hour-long programme. I was actually so green that occasionally I'd feel intimidated by the thought of everything I didn't know. Each day when we went out on set, I'd feel baffled by some of the things that the directors were asking us to do. I'd always end up standing in the wrong place, talking to the wrong camera. I was ignorant of the jargon and language. Sometimes a runner would ask me what they thought was a straightforward question, and I'd look at them blankly as if they were talking to me in Swahili. I had two options. One was to style it out and pretend that I knew more than I did. I reckon I could have got away with that. The great benefit of walking into a room where everybody knows you're fresh out of a special military unit is that very few people are willing to call you out, even when you're doing or saying something stupid. The other route to take was to humble myself. Admit I barely knew the basics and ask question after question. After a while, I realised how much I enjoyed that feeling of being thrown into the deep end. I like starting right at the bottom, knowing that the only way is up. It's exciting to get a sense of how much you have to learn. But you'll only get the benefit from that if you're willing to admit, not just to yourself, but to others around you, that you know enough to know that you don't know enough. How to deal with criticism. I think we should all learn to welcome positive criticism, although there's no denying that it can sting when you first hear it. We're only human, so initially your pride will probably be hurt. You might even start to doubt yourself, especially when you've stepped out of your comfort zone to try something new. When somebody criticises me, I do a couple of things. The first is that I remind myself that we all make mistakes some of the time. There's usually something we could be doing better, and there's no shame in messing up. The next thing I do is to interrogate what exactly it is I'm feeling. Am I angry with the person who has called me out? Or am I actually angry with myself for having dropped the bollock in the first place? I try to work out why it's provoking such emotion in me. Perhaps the criticism is unfair and they're just taking a pop at me. If that's the case, then I swat it away. You're never going to learn anything from the sort of sniping, bitter criticism that you get from jealous, resentful people. But if I see that the person who has corrected me is trying to help me rather than make me look stupid in public, I'll do everything I can to absorb what they have to say. You should always listen when criticism comes from somebody who cares about you, someone who simply doesn't want to see you make the same mistake twice. Of course, there isn't anybody alive who doesn't like being told how amazing they are. But at the end of the day, praise doesn't teach you anything. How would you ever have learned to drive or earned a professional qualification if nobody had ever criticised you? That's why I'm always puzzled by those people who think they've exposed me as a hypocrite because I'm sometimes harsh on contestants. How can you call yourself positive when we've all seen you bawling out? Yep, you're not as clever as you think. There's always a positive in what I do. I know that telling that person they're wonderful isn't going to help them realise their potential, but I'm actually extremely protective of the recruits. For the duration of the time they're on the show, they might as well be my children. Woe betide the person behind the camera who accidentally knocks one of them over. I'm just desperate for them to become the best version of themselves that they can be. What I want for you is to understand the same thing about feedback and criticism as the show's most successful contestants do. It's not somebody pushing you down. that person is giving you a hand up. Learn from the best. Part of humbling yourself is realizing that there are many, many others who know more than you. Instead of trying to compete with them or getting intimidated by what they've achieved, why not listen to them and learn? Seek out the people who are best in your field. Work out what they do that sets them above everybody else. Then see what parts of that you can apply to your own life. Lessons. You're never going to get anywhere worth going if you don't learn the things that are worth knowing. I left school without a single qualification, but I know the value of learning. You should make sure that you do too. Don't make the mistake of thinking of education as something that only takes place in a classroom. There are so many different ways to acquire knowledge, so find out what works for you. Theoretical and practical knowledge both have their advantages, but ideally you'd combine both. If you can combine the four corners of the classroom with the 4 points of the world, you'll be unstoppable. Be humble. Be the sort of person who knows enough to know that they don't know enough. And never feel afraid of admitting your ignorance. It's okay to ask questions. It's not okay to try to blag your way through life. Praise is great, but you can't learn from it. So embrace criticism. It's a crucial part of growing and learning. If you ignore it, you'll be shutting yourself off from an important element in your personal development. Chapter 16. You overthink situations. What I love about the mountains is the freedom they represent. Pure and utter freedom. No one can tell me to come down. Not the police, nor the Pope, nor the President of the United States. That decision is completely mine. There are no restrictions, no limitations, nothing to suppress or shackle me. All of that just falls away. If I want to climb up to the summit and never descend again, I can. I always return from my journeys up mountains energized and excited. I never come back the same person. There is nothing and nobody to tell you who you are or who they think you need to be. On the mountain, you and your actions alone define you. You feel bonded to the people you're with. You all have the same objective. Some people talk on the mountain, just as they might chat to a friend they've bumped into in the supermarket. Everywhere else, I'm a talker, a hyperactive blur of conversation and thoughts. But up there, I'm almost silent. I say what I need to, and not a single word more. The only thing I want to hear is the regular thud of my heart. I want to take everything in, to appreciate its majestic simplicity. I want to embrace the moment I'm in. When you're up there in the mountains in the freezing air, surrounded by jagged rocks and vast expanses of glistening white snow, it clears your mind. It might sound strange, but you switch off. The experience can feel so grueling, so tough, that your world shrinks to a single act, putting one foot in front of the other. You don't think about anything else, because you can't think about anything else. It's the ultimate simplification in life. Existence stripped back to its most basic elements. A reminder that the only important thing is what's right in front of you this minute. When I'm in the mountains, I feel more in tune with the world. It makes me look at life in a different way. There's something so exciting and liberating about knowing that no matter how challenging or dangerous or complex, there will always be a way up. You get addicted to that feeling. I've got a sleeping bag, food, I've got a stove, I'm surrounded by snow that I can melt when I need a drink. What more do I need? The simplicity of it all is mesmeric. It gives you a new perspective on your life. I feel gratitude when I'm on a mountain. It stops me taking things for granted. You feel your real emotions. You realise how much you miss some people, how much you love them. And as you're scooping a pile of snow into your pan to melt on your stove, suddenly a solution will present itself to an issue that had seemed impossible to resolve. There's no effort. You're solving problems almost without realising that you're doing it. That brings with it peace. It's only by being up there that you realise how plagued by distractions our everyday lives are. Phones, doorbells, work anxieties, delivery drivers, guilt, school runs, people who want or expect you to do stuff for them. We're slaves to all of these things. You now see how irrelevant that situation is that's been bugging you so much back home. It now becomes clear that all of the stress and pressure that feels inevitable when you're down at sea level is in fact self-induced. You can just drop it. You realise that the world we live in doesn't make our lives complex. We do. I overthink, therefore I am. A lot of the complexity we experience in our day-to-day lives comes from that capacity we all have to overthink. We're in the strange position of being apex predators who used to be a lot further down the food chain. Tens of thousands of years ago, to be human was to be permanently aware of a host of dangers. This means that we're evolved to be acutely sensitive to threat, which in turn means that we take in 9 times as much negative information about the world as we do positive. Our outlook is inherently anxious. When you fall into the trap of overthinking, your brain goes into a negative spiral and it's difficult to get anything in the right perspective. You can't see things clearly. You attach exaggerated levels of importance and meaning to insignificant gestures or words or facial expressions. I wish I hadn't said that yesterday. Why did I say that yesterday? What will Sam think of me? I wonder how she interpreted it. Oh my God, she probably hates me. When I was in a special military unit, that way of looking at the world could have cost me my life. The first man in doesn't get a chance to overthink. So I had to learn to keep things simple, break things down, keep them black and white. The world is full of polar opposites. Once you recognise that, everything becomes much simpler. If things don't work for you, they'll work against you. If you can't be honest with yourself, you'll be living a lie. If something isn't progressive, it will be regressive. I don't see the need to make things any more complex than that. Life is complicated. We are very complicated beings. Why add any more complexity to the mix? Now, when I get over-involved in an argument, or a particular problem keeps turning over and over in my head until I begin to worry I'm going mad, I try to imagine what I'd think about these things if I were on the upper slopes of a mountain, freezing my bollocks off and wondering how the fuck I'm going to get to the summit. Almost invariably, the answer is that they're not worth another second of your time or attention. Like I said, keep it simple. Complexity is overthinking's closest ally. Simplicity is its deadliest enemy. Get this bit done right now. Narrowing your focus is often a great way of combating the temptation to overthink. Don't worry about what's coming down the road. Just concentrate on what's in front of you. Don't get bound up in the billion little permutations of what could happen. If you do that, you'll be overwhelmed. When I was on the boat during mutiny, I didn't spend much time thinking about the thousands of miles we still had left of our journey. I focused on the 12 miles that were immediately ahead of me. Or when we were on escape, salvaging bits of engine, I didn't think too much about the intricate difficulties we might face integrating the engine with other bits of machinery. We just had to get it to work. You need to focus squarely on what you know is happening right now, not what you worry might happen in some imaginary future. Privilege the stuff you can hear and see, not the stuff you conjure up in your mind. Remember, you're a problem solver. I've talked before about how we're a species of problem solvers. It's one of the things that distinguishes mankind from the rest of the animal kingdom. This ability has come to our aid countless times over the course of our time on the planet. It's meant we could work out how to cook meat at one end of history and develop COVID vaccines in record time at the other. And it can come to your aid when you've tumbled deep down an overthinking rabbit hole. Instead of torturing yourself by trying to work out all the ways the future could go wrong, why not focus on thinking about what you could do to prevent your worst case scenario from happening at all? Or challenge yourself to identify 5 potential solutions to them in the unlikely event that the doomsday you've spent your life predicting actually does arrive. It's much more helpful to focus on how a problem can be fixed than it is to dwell endlessly on the problem itself. Your brain will be working so hard on trying to come up with constructive responses that might actually make a material difference to what you're going through, that it won't have time to get lost in a negative spiral of thoughts that will only make things worse. Chaos versus control. We're not always good at remembering that a very large proportion of what goes on in the world is completely outside of our control. Many people get obsessed with trying to exert some kind of power over things that just aren't within their grasp and never will be. It means that they lose sight of the things that they can control. It also leads to overthinking, because if you start considering all the things that could happen, then you're never going to stop. You'll simply end up in a negative spiral, filling your mind with a million doomsday scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? I always say to people who are anxious and stressed, write a list of all the stuff that's bothering you. Then, as soon as you've done that, cross out all the things that you can't control. Don't give them even a second of your thought or energy, because doing so is an appalling waste of your time. I guarantee that in a 10-strong list of worries, no more than 3 will be things that you can control. Why focus on that elusive 70% when there's 30% that you can have a real impact on? Otherwise, that 70% that you can do nothing about will be swirling around in your head, so much so that you lose sight of the 30% you can do something about. So, if you're having problems with your boss, work out which bits of the situation you can control and which you can't. Focus on the stuff that you make a difference to, and let go of the stuff you can't have an impact on. You can go into the office, ask to see your boss, and tell them that you feel as if you're being treated badly. You can control that, so don't shy away from the decision you need to make. You cannot control how they respond, but you can control what you say to them, how you say it. You can control the way you present yourself. You can control the way you react to whatever they might say to you in return. But there's other stuff you'll never be able to control, and the sooner you make your peace with it, the better. Not for a single moment would I deny the reality of climate change. It's clearly a challenge that as a world we're going to have to address, and sharpish. But it's not something that you, as an individual, can do anything significant about. You might be able to do some recycling, use your bike more, and cut down on single-use plastics or whatever. Indeed, you should be doing that sort of thing. But there's absolutely no way you can stop massive power stations and factories in China or India belching fumes into the atmosphere. You're never going to be able to get between the Americans and their desire to fill their massive fuel-guzzling vehicles with petrol or diesel. So don't get drawn into apocalyptic speculation. Do what you can. Don't worry about what you can't. As soon as you do, you'll get sucked into a negative spiral. When you're anxious about something that's outside your control, your sense of dread will inevitably just grow and grow. And this is precisely because you can't do anything. If you're worried about the state of your teeth, then the solution is easy and absolutely in your hands. Brush your teeth more regularly. Buy some floss. See a dentist. But what are you going to do about the polar ice caps? Seriously, because you'll start feeling guilty about something that in no conceivable scenario is your responsibility. This isn't a call for you to cut yourself off from others or to dismiss your feelings of empathy. It's just a realistic appraisal of what we can and can't do. And it's also an acknowledgement of the limits of our mind and bodies. We have enough fucking things to worry about as it is. Why increase that burden? Too much knowledge can be a burden. Just as it's possible to think too much about a subject, it's also possible to know too much before you go into a situation. Mutiny is a good example. Before I set off on that epic journey around the Pacific, I made a conscious decision not to read Captain Bligh's journals. I didn't want to study who he was as a man or what sort of decisions he took. I knew that if I tried to replicate how he'd succeeded, I'd leave myself in the unfortunate and painfully ironic place of guaranteeing my own failure. That knowledge would have inhibited me. I wouldn't have been able to see clearly. Every time a new challenge or problem presented itself, a little voice in my head would have piped up. What would Bligh have done? Instead of responding to the situation in the moment, actually looking at what was in front of my very eyes, I'd be defaulting to another person's experience and ideas. It would lead to me second-guessing every call I made. I knew what my job was. I had to sail 4,000 miles in a 23-foot open boat manned by a crew that was subsisting on 350 calories a day. As far as I was concerned, that was where the similarities between Bligh and me started and ended. I didn't get carried away studying which islands he stopped off at or what precise route he took. I certainly didn't want to spend too much time learning about how he motivated his crew. Clue: there's a pretty good reason why he was chucked off his boat in the first place. The only surprise to me is that there was only one mutiny. I knew that I was a good leader. I proved that to myself on the battlefield time and time again. So don't cloud your head with what somebody else might do. As I've said a million times before, you'll never be able to fit 100% into another individual's skin. But you're a perfect fit for your skin. What would you do? Don't pass the buck. Don't hand over responsibility to another person. Take that responsibility. What would you do? When you overload yourself with too much information about what other people have done, it limits you as an individual. And even more dangerously, that extra knowledge gives you a whole load of unnecessary ammunition that enables you to avoid doing things. The negative part of you is simply desperate for reasons to persuade you to shy away from this decision or that adventure. Your mind fills up with a jumble of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. It becomes so overwhelming that especially if you're predisposed to suffer from anxiety and stress, you just stay the hell away. And guess what? Your life gets a little smaller as a result. Exercise. Challenge your negative assumptions. When you can feel your negative thoughts begin to spiral inside your head, you can try to reframe the way you think about the situation you're contemplating so that your focus switches from negative to positive outcomes. The first stage is to work out what it is exactly that's troubling you. You can't tackle a problem properly if you can't see it clearly. It might be something like, I'm worried if I take this job, I might be exposed as a fraud. I think I'll make a mess of it, and that will make me look stupid in front of people whose opinion I value. That will have a knock-on effect on my confidence. If I fail at this, I don't think I'll have the courage to ever try something like this again. Then ask yourself how imagining this outcome, failing at the job, makes you feel. Frankly, I just want to stay in bed and put my head under the covers. But what if there was another way of looking at this situation? What if the worst case scenario stopped being your default assumption? Now try to imagine what it would look like if you took the job and things went well. I know I'm qualified for the job, and I'm pretty sure I'd really enjoy it. I could end up thriving, and just going for it would make other people respect me. How does adopting this positive perspective make you feel? Motivated, excited. I'm really keen to just get cracking and put my application in. This is a great habit to develop. The more you practice swapping negative outcomes for positive ones, the more likely you are to start doing this automatically. Listen to your body. A lot of the time, our overthinking is fed by nervous energy. Our whole body feels as if it's been flooded with adrenaline. And maybe one leg begins to jog up and down, as if it has a life of its own. And then our anxiety begins a negative spiral. It's your body telling you something. Whenever that happens to me, I find the best thing to do is to divert that nervous energy into a positive direction. Instead of sitting down and letting my mind fill with worries, I'll go to the gym. Afterwards, I always feel calmer. You can achieve the same by taking the dog for a walk, or getting your skipping rope out for 10 minutes, or turning cartwheels. Do whatever helps you to work that nervous energy out of your system. Lessons. We live in a bewilderingly complex world that gets more complicated with every passing day. Overthinking only adds to the complexity. So why the fuck would you do that to yourself? Your mantra should always be, keep it simple. Try to see the world in black and white. Don't make things any harder than they need to be. Is this thing good for me or bad for me? Yes or no? Don't stress yourself out by thinking about the bad thing that might possibly, potentially, maybe happen in 6 months' time. Work out what you're confronted with right this minute, then deal with it. You must try to control everything in your life that you can control, because there's a hell of a lot out there that you can't control. And when you realise you can't control a situation, let it go. If you can't stop the ice caps from melting, then don't expend energy worrying about them. Learning is vitally important, but thinking too much can be a burden. Don't let your brain obsess about information it doesn't need to get the job done. Chapter 17. You still believe that perfect is possible. I used to believe in perfection. I absolutely do not anymore. I've come to understand that nothing and nobody is perfect. I believe that the sooner you work that out and make peace with it, the sooner you can start living a meaningful, fulfilling life. But the tragedy is that there are still so many people out there who eat themselves up in the pursuit of something that doesn't exist. It's easy to see why. Perfection is such a seductive idea. Surely wanting to be perfect is a good thing. It's pure, it's faultless, it's the result of hard work. We're all taught to admire people who claim to be perfectionists. And yet, there isn't an individual alive who doesn't have flaws. No person in the course of history has ever got through their life without making mistakes. It's just part of what it means to be a human being. Somebody who continues to think that perfection is possible is denying that reality. I also see now that a belief in perfection is really just another way of not rising to challenges. even another way of lying to yourself. Because if you can convince yourself that the reason you're still sitting on your couch is because you're waiting for perfection, that thing that's always just around the corner, then you can postpone all the important decisions and commitments you need to make. This is true of those people who are waiting for the perfect opportunity, which really means that they end up stranded. It's true too of the writer who keeps working and working at his novel, refusing to send it out into the world because he's afraid that people won't like it. He knows that this is an excuse. You might think that you're doing the right thing by insisting on perfection, but what you're really doing is building a wall around yourself. It was failure that made me realise that the idea of perfection is a dangerous illusion. All those fuck-ups freed me. They showed me that you learn 1,000 times more. You become 1,000 times more resilient. You open yourself up to 1,000 times more opportunities by failing and bouncing back than you ever would in a fruitless quest for perfection. So, for example, somebody who still believes in perfection will look at a job opportunity and all they see are the flaws. Every one of those flaws gives them a reason to postpone committing. Not forever, they tell themselves, but just until the perfect job opportunity comes up. It's a negative mindset draped in a positive-looking cloak. But you need to go on that journey, because along the way, you're going to pick up those little percentage improvements that will push you closer and closer to becoming the best version of yourself. You'll be able to add new experiences and new ways of seeing the world and solving problems to your psychological bank. Practice doesn't make perfect. It can't make perfect. Nothing can. But practice does make progress. Amy was so hard on herself. I've got no idea where the pressure to be perfect came from, but it was strangling her. All her life she'd worked really hard, and anyone watching would think that she reaped the rewards that her efforts deserved. She was a high-flying lawyer with a lovely family, living in a beautiful house. They took regular holidays, and she and her husband drove nice cars. But she couldn't take any pleasure in any of this. Instead of thinking about everything she had achieved, she was fixated on what she hadn't managed to do. She told me even 20 years on, she was furious about the fact that she'd only come second in her law class. There were times when she listened to her daughter practicing the piano and found herself criticising the couple of tiny mistakes her kids had made instead of praising her for the amazing progress she'd made. She hadn't intended to give her daughter a bad review. It was just her instinctive reaction. Amy knew that her relentless insistence on perfection was damaging her and risked being passed on to her family. But she couldn't see her way out of that mindset. I explained to Amy that if you always insist on perfection, you're guaranteeing you'll never be happy. If you think that you're a failure, if you're not top of the class every time there's a test, you're setting yourself targets that are impossible to reach. Once you can accept that you won't always get things right and that there are things about you that aren't perfect, then life becomes a lot more straightforward. You might make a mistake here and there, I said. Occasionally, you might fall short of the standards you ask of yourself. But nobody around you will love you any less as a result. You're still the same person as you were before. It doesn't change your value in any way. What I've realised is that I'm still the same person, whether I've just knocked something out of the park or have made a mess of a big job. I don't let either my failures or successes define me. That's true for you too. That's true for everybody. Amy looked doubtful. I know you said you couldn't help criticising your daughter when she was practicing the piano, but you still love her the same, whether or not she bangs the wrong note out here and there. It doesn't make you think any less of her, does it? No, and I knew how hard she was trying. I just had that first reaction, which I'm ashamed of. But when I take a step back, I know I need to cut her some slack. So why can't you do the same for yourself? Well, she appeared stumped for a couple of seconds before she managed to pick her thread up again. I've got high standards. They're really important to me. Good. You should be asking a lot of yourself. But you can do that without eviscerating yourself every time you don't get something quite right. Make sure you take time to celebrate the successes. Enjoy the fact that you're doing well. And when you make a mistake, don't treat it as a judgment on you. Just see it as an opportunity to learn. It's something you can use to help you get better and stronger. The power of progress. When I was younger, I believed that the day would come when I'd have everything worked out. I'd be this godlike figure who always made the right decisions, who always did the right thing. It's only recently that I've properly come to understand that none of us will ever reach that final point. Nobody's ever going to give you a gold medal and say, "Well done, you're now the best version of yourself." It's a process that will go on and on and on. But that's liberating, because when you realise that perfection doesn't exist and that nobody's perfect, not me, not you, not anybody, then suddenly you realise that you've got space to get things the wrong way round, or to mess up, or to occasionally do stupid stuff. And it doesn't mean you're unusual, it just means you're human. The pressure to be perfect can be a suffocating burden. But if you realise that all you can do is aim to get a little bit better each day, you'll be set free. As a society, we're really bad at recognising incremental improvements. We overlook those tiny steps forward most of us are making most of the time. And yet, they're what we should be celebrating. If you made a fraction of progress since you woke up this morning, then you're already smashing it. Relative values. Just as everyone has a different definition of perfection, so everyone has their own definition of success. My triumph might be your failure. It's an entirely relative concept. Not, of course, that you'd know this if you look at the way we're educated. As children, we're invariably taught that there's a right way of getting the right answer. It's a form of indoctrination that restricts our ability to think creatively. This is how you do it. But in the real world, there are always so many different routes we can take, so many different solutions we can try. Life is very rarely as simple or as formulaic as an algebra problem. But it's so hard to get a clear view of what success means to us because we're always being bombarded by other people's definition of what it means to be successful. The point is, though, that there are plenty of doctors and CEOs who feel they are failing. Owning a Mercedes is great, but does it really prove anything about you? Or is it just a sign that you're doing a good job of meeting other people's expectations? Life is not a competition, and the sooner you realise that, the happier you'll be. But it's hard, because the message that we are given over and over again is that our success is completely relative to other people's. Unless we're doing better than our friends or neighbours, we're not seen to be doing well at all. The thing is, there are 8 billion people on this planet. Someone is always going to be doing better than you. There will always be another human being to compare yourself with. Somebody with a bigger house or yacht. If you try to measure your success by those standards, you'll never feel successful. You're fighting against a relentless, unbeatable machine. It will never be satisfied, and so neither will you. And remember, society wants you to think like this, because then you'll become the perfect cog in its machine. Working hard doing a job you don't enjoy, for a firm you don't like, to buy things you don't need that won't make you happy. Society relies on you being like this. It needs you to remain on the treadmill. I think that deep down we all know this. Our understanding of how trapped we are creeps out of the dark corners of our brains in those brief moments when we're alone and at peace. We understand how wrong all of this is. We understand how strange it is that we've exchanged the freedoms we enjoyed for thousands of years for a cramped, panicked existence at the beck and call of a system that doesn't care about us or our best interests. It's not bothered whether we're happy or sad, or fulfilled or empty. It just needs us to keep turning up for work and spending our money. This is why it's so important to take the time to work out what real success means to you. You must be as honest with yourself as you can. Do what you can to empty your mind of all the aspirations that other people have for you, or that society expects you to hold. What do you want? If you were looking back on your life, would you really see success as being about having a nice car in your drive? Or would it actually be the difference you were able to make to the happiness of other people? You could live in a caravan and still be the happiest person alive. My brother Daniel's like that, and I'm so proud and happy that he's worked that out about himself. He's got that special ability to tune out all of the pressure that crushes so many others. For me, the ultimate success isn't material. You can't measure it in money in the bank or likes on Instagram. All I want is that people who meet me see me as a good person. Your view of success will be different. Find it. Lessons. The sooner you get the idea of perfection out of your head, the better. The question we should ask ourselves isn't, is it perfect? It should be, can I make it work for me? It's important to set yourself high standards. But if you expect perfection from yourself, you're guaranteeing you'll be unhappy. Perfection doesn't exist. Progress does. That's what you should be aiming for. That's what we should all be better at celebrating. If you're only even a little further on than you were yesterday, then you're moving in the right direction. If you spend your life waiting for the perfect opportunity or working away at your plan until it's perfect, you'll never get anywhere. Don't use the quest for perfection as an excuse. Get out there, make mistakes, create something, because waiting built nothing. Our concept of perfection is relative. So is our understanding of success. Find out what success means to you. Then hold on to that idea. Don't fall into the trap of judging your achievements by other people's standards.